Now, a landmark report into the way police forces handle stalking cases will be published today, with the hard-hitting findings expected to include a substantial number of recommendations to improve the way officers deal with the crime.
Sparked by a so-called super complaint against the police, campaigners are hoping the report will address claims of deep-rooted, systematic issues and failures to protect victims. So stalking is alarmingly widespread, actually. 1 in 5 women over the age of 16 has been a victim of stalking.
And less than 2% of stalking reports result in a conviction. And being stalked has resulted in over 90% of victims suffering psychological issues.
Well, former Corrie actor and broadcaster Nicola Thorp was stalked and terrorised for 2 years by a man who called himself her personal Grim Reaper, while all the time using 25 different identities to bombard her online. And she joins us now, along with McLaughlin of the Suzy Lamplugh Trust, which supports victims of stalking and harassment. Good to see both of you this morning. Catherine, I know we've spoken before, haven't we, Catherine? Nicola, I had no idea really about this because that's the situation, isn't it, when you're being stalked?
Yes.
Until it gets to a court case, which you've had, it's a sort of a very isolating and terrifying experience.
Yes.
What was your experience in terms of police reaction, the way you were treated on reporting it?
Well, do you know what? I have to commend the police, because when I eventually came to reporting it to them, they did take it seriously. But I know that I'm one of the lucky ones. Also, I have a sort of semi-public profile, and I often wonder if it was taken more seriously as a result of that. But
because you were famous, or because they could imagine it more likely? Because sometimes I think that can be a problem.
Yes.
You're in the public eye. People have sort of accepted that this happens horrifically to people in the public eye, but must be much harder for people not in the public eye.
Absolutely. And I'm, you know, I guess I'm lucky in a sense because I myself am a women's advocate. I've campaigned for years for women's safety and for women's rights. And actually that was probably, we think, one of the reasons why this man targeted me specifically. He'd actually seen me on a previous campaign and mentioned that in one of the first messages that he sent me.
How did it begin?
I don't know. I still don't know. But I know that the first contact that we're aware of that happened from him was he sent a photograph of his genitalia. And actually, it was that photograph that ended up identifying him in the end, because when the police raided his house, they noticed from the background of the photo his bedroom and could prove that it was, you know, him that had taken the photograph. So it started with that. And this was in 2018, post-Me Too, and I think a lot of the time I would say to friends, oh, this is happening, that's happening, and they say, oh, just block them. Just get rid of it, block it. But as I've said previously, I'm a women's rights campaigner. Lots of women contact me on Twitter, on Instagram. They need to get in touch with me to talk about various things. So I keep my DMs open. And it carried on and carried on. And then over the course of 2 years, it eventually clicked that these various different people were all the same person. And in fact, he once pretended to be a woman who needed help to go to the police and help report harassment and wanted me to meet up with her in real life. And it actually turned out to be him. And he didn't show, thank goodness, but yeah.
Gosh, that is the thing, is it? Because you just don't know, because they use multiple identities, which is frightening. So you don't know, you don't even know who's contacting you, whether you become suspicious of almost everything, I suppose, that ends up in your DM box or...
Yeah, and you'd think it would be a kind of happy day when the police called me and said, we've arrested him, we found him. And I was elated. I went, okay, who is it? Who's this man? They said, we can't tell you.
Right.
Well, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So, look, 90% of victims suffer psychological issues. How did it affect you, and how bad did it get in terms of the terror?
So I think it was after the arrest, because I know, sadly, all too well, you know, when an arrest happens or when there's the chance that somebody carrying out this behaviour might not be able to do it anymore, a victim could be at further risk. There could be an increased risk to the victim. And it was very disturbing to me that I didn't know what this man looked like. I didn't know his name. I didn't know where he lived. And I begged the police for months and months to just tell me You know, give me some information. The most important thing for me is I wanted to know how tall he was, because I wanted to know if he could carry me. I wanted to know how much of a physical threat he would be. And nothing for months until they eventually showed me a photograph, very fleetingly, of what he looked like. And I actually had to go to court to find out what his name was. So that, I think, psychologically was difficult, because he then became everyone that I met. The police wouldn't even tell me if he was somebody that I knew, if it was an ex-partner, anything like that. Yeah.
And the first time you saw him, this is really hammers it home for me. The first time you saw him was it the day you both were in the court?
Yes.
And what were you behind him in the queue? Or?
I was, yeah. So if people have been to court before, you go through a kind of airport-style security system and you have to give your name in to a security guard. And I was there just trying to focus on what was happening. I knew I was going to be reading out my victim impact statement, and I was quite nervous. And then I just heard this man in front of me say the name, and I froze. It was him. Gosh. I was, 30 centimetres away from him.
Catherine, so this report is due out later today, and it is expected to be fairly critical. And this is a result of this super complaint by the National Stalking Consortium. I said that just the identifying of offenders, just general investigation practice wasn't good enough. What changes are you hoping to see, and do you think, you know, we will see a difference?
We really hope that the police forces across the country take this opportunity to really raise their game. From the minute a victim contacts them, to take it seriously, to investigate it properly, to make sure they identify it as a course of conduct crime. There are often multiple events that police aren't joining those dots together, so they might be recorded under different crime numbers, and so the victim has to keep retelling their story. And I think just that general sense of not being heard, not being listened to. We want police to refer victims to specialist advocacy services like our own, to get them in touch with the National Stalking Helpline, because we know that if a victim gets good support at an early stage in their journey, they're much more likely to see a prosecution through, and their perpetrator is much more likely to be convicted. So it's so important. So it comes with training, data, that whole package.
Why has there been this reluctance to identify offenders in the past? Like in Nicola's case, why not say, well, look, this is who it is, and Nicola can at least rest a little bit easy, go, like, I've got an idea, it's not those people, and I've got a better idea of it.
We think it's really vital that victims have a chance to understand and work out who their perpetrator is, because victims work incredibly hard to keep themselves and their families safe. And if you're not clear who your perpetrator is, that's incredibly difficult. And I think it's really important for victim safety that this is looked at.
And also, I'm aware that there'll probably be people watching this now screaming at the TV going, I know who my stalker is, it's this person, and the police are not taking it seriously. You know, it's not just about anonymous cyber stalking. We're talking about people who might live in the same neighbourhood as somebody and are terrorised daily, and yet often the police are not recording these crimes. They record them as what's a so-called lesser crime of maybe harassment or malicious communication, rather than recognising this as a very distinct pattern that may in fact escalate.
And I think you've talked really eloquently about the fear and the distress and the kind of relentless nature of this and the repeated identities. And really, sadly, your story's not uncommon. We hear this all of the time. It's often people that our victims are aware of in some capacity, either an ex-partner, friend, neighbour, colleague, acquaintance, family member. But that psychological impact is really deep. And we know also this behaviour can escalate. And I think those points of escalation are not well understood by the police. And we've seen that play out incredibly tragically time and time again.
And this is... It's not uncommon. 1 in 5 women, 1 in 10 men. I really want to know, obviously, everything should be victim-focused and make sure that is dealt with first, but also, why is this happening? Why are there people, men and women, but it is the majority of offenders are men, why do they go about this pattern of behaviour, and what can we do as a society to stop it earlier on? Because, as you say, this escalates. It's going to be more expensive for the court system, for the police. If we can really recognise early on what those warning signs are, perhaps in friends, in family, I think a lot of it comes from a sense of isolation and people wanting to feel a sense of connection, very misguided. But we need to really cut it off at source.
Yes, well, the Minister for Safeguarding, Jess Phillips, who I'm sure you've had a lot of dealings with.
She's incredible.
She's been passionate and campaigning about for a number of years. She said the report sets out will set out important recommendations for how the whole justice system can better tackle this awful crime. She says we've already actively considered these, looking at how we can work with the police to overhaul how we respond to this crime and put more perpetrators behind bars. So that, hopefully, you will feel is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Look, if you have been affected by any of the issues we've been discussing, you can find advice and support at itv.com/helplines. And thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you both.
And thank you.
Thank you.